Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of my podcast, Cult Conversations, the Influence Continuum with Dr. Steve Hassan. And man, oh man, am I excited to be with Kris Goldsmith. I've been trying to get you, Kris, on my podcast since I started almost 3 years ago. I've been following all your posts. I just think you're a rock star in my world, veterans fighting fascism. Let me just do a short intro and we'll jump in. You are a vet and you are an accomplished public policy advocate, nonprofit leader, expert on threats posed by domestic extremist organizations that want to destroy our democracy. You're the founder and CEO of Task Force Butler Institute, which is a nonprofit organization that trains vets in research and operations to counter extremism, teaching the skills and context necessary to keep veterans and their communities safe as they gather intelligence on dangerous individuals and hate groups. And I love your little videos where you're walking and talking into the microphone and the dog is following you and you're talking about how your people, pretend that they're radicals, go to these meetings, you use drones to get license plates to identify these folks. And we're in a moment in existential history where we've never faced such a threat to our freedom and to democracy. So with that, I'm pitching you the softball, my friend. Tell us about what you've been doing, what you need, because I really want to get people supporting your work, because I think your organization is awesome.
Thank you. Well, it's great to finally be here. I'm sorry it took so long, but I promise I will come back whenever you want me to.
Please do.
So Task Force Butler Institute was founded kind of, in the wake of January 6th. During January 6th and in the months leading up to it, I was operating as a consultant working for an intelligence firm whose primary motivator was capitalism, was to make a profit. And as someone who's worked in the nonprofit world almost my entire life, aside from serving in the military, our missions just kind of didn't align.
Right.
And I found myself really frustrated, not just with working in the for-profit world, but the limitations of law enforcement as I was doing things kind of as a hobby, somewhat not even related to the work, infiltrating extremist organizations that were planning violence, not just on January 6th, but leading up to it, especially in Georgia, which was one of the states that was targeted by Donald Trump and every one of his followers in the cult. So I started going on television, talking about this work of infiltrating these extremist organizations on my own. And any time that I did, I'd have a bunch of veterans reaching out to me, usually on LinkedIn or some other social media platform, basically saying like, hey, put me in, coach. Like, I want to join you. Yeah. And it took me a good year to figure out that I couldn't just tell these people, no, it's not safe and I can't encourage it. I actually figured out a way to make it safe. So I worked with a team, bunch of veterans, to put together a program to help veterans collect intelligence. We focus on criminality, to be specific, by these extremist organizations so that we can bring that evidence forward to law enforcement, to journalists, and to victims, so that those extremists can be held accountable in a court of law, which is very different from, I think, the way that that our opposition tries to portray us as doing things like doxing people. I'm not giving out phone numbers or addresses, except to the police. And if you have a problem with me giving your contact information to the police, that's probably a you problem, not a me problem.
Right. But the enemy likes to project all their bad actions on us and paint us as the bad people, when in fact we're just trying to, uplift law and order and trust and societal values, as opposed to chaos and fear and terrorism.
Exactly.
And I gotta add in, because I watched your comments after Trump did the unconditional pardon of Rhodes, the Oath Keeper and Proud Boys, and it's like, you've been working to put these people away. You've helped the authorities have the data. I talked with Denver Riggleman, who got Mark Meadows' cell phone and got all the data and the pictures, and Capitol Hunters got all kinds of pictures of my former cult, the Moonies, at January 6th. And now what's going on? And now Kash Patel is being proffered as the head of the FBI. What are we going to do, Kris? Help. Dude.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there. It is, there are thousands of Americans who came together after January 6th, most of them completely anonymous. A lot of them never even got to know who they were working with, but they formed these anonymous collectives where they were simply going through publicly available documentation of the crimes that occurred on January 6th, the thousands of discrete crimes on that day, on the insurrection. And a lot of people, like myself, were self-taught. People hear that I was in the Army and they assume, oh, you must have been an intelligence analyst. No, my job was to blow stuff up. I was a forward observer. So
Sorry for laughing. It's not funny.
All of the skills that I've learned have been self-taught. And there are thousands of Americans who, some quit their jobs because they were so dedicated to this. And they really changed their lifestyles in ways that they were making incredible sacrifices. Because the people who attacked our democracy, they understood that if they got away with it, they would be emboldened.
Yeah.
And despite 4 years of work, with all that these thousands of patriotic Americans did to see justice done, not just for the victims, the police who were beaten that day, not just for the members of Congress who we are elected to represent us,
right.
And how terrifying that experience was for them, but for our democracy as a whole. A physical attack on the Capitol was, for me, as a New Yorker, I was 16 on 9/11, I was brought right back to that feeling of watching my country attacked.
Mm-hmm.
But unlike 9/11, I had kind of like a survivor's guilt on January 6th. My friends were in the building, and I had been giving intelligence to law enforcement about these plans for months ahead of time. And I felt guilty. I know that I shouldn't, but I felt this way, that I could have done something to have stopped this, right? So me and so many other people tried to work through that survivor's guilt by finding justice. Mm-hmm. And with the stroke of a pen, a big fat Sharpie, Donald Trump erased, I would guess, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of hours of work by patriotic Americans.
Yeah, and undercutting the statement that he's for law and law and order, and just having now a criminal militia that is going to be paraded around as heroes. Mm-hmm. I heard you say that these guys are going to be paraded around as heroes.
Yeah, I wrote about it on my Substack about how guys like Stuart Rhodes were going to be invited to campaign with Trump. We know that, he's not eligible to run for president again, but we also know that he's a showman and he can't stop campaigning. He's still collecting. His campaign is still soliciting donations, right?
Oh, yeah.
So he will continue campaigning, and he's going to bring these violent felons up on stage. He's going to idolize them, and he's going to further radicalize the MAGA cult into accepting political violence, not just as acceptable, but as necessary. And that is profoundly dangerous, not just for our democracy, but for countless Americans who may come across these people in their everyday lives and become the victim of some sort of attempted vigilantism or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
An example would be, we're seeing all these ICE raids now, right? I expect that within the next few weeks, if not the next few months, that Donald Trump will give somewhat of an official nod to these militias to reinforce ICE. Mm-hmm. He's going to realize that police, local police, sheriff's office, ICE, DHS, FBI, he can throw everything at his, biggest pet peeve of having brown people in our country, he's going to realize that that's not enough to solve the problem for the MAGA base. And he's going to start recruiting and deputizing radicals to work in what should be at law enforcement.
Yeah, so my former cult has an AR-15 factory and a cult worshiping the AR-15 called RodOfIronMinistries.org in Pennsylvania. And they have 2 training compounds, one in Tennessee and one near Waco, Texas, training people how to kill in civil war with the Alex Joneses and the Steve Bannons and the other folks. So that doesn't bode well for us activists. But I'm not leaving the country. So
just before this interview, I just published an article on Substack about exactly this. Like, everyone's asking me, what do we do? And as I write in my piece, if people want to read it, it's On Offense with Kris Goldsmith on Substack. I'm talking about how since January 20th, I have had thousands of people reach out to me across every platform: email, Substack, TikTok, Twitter. I haven't used Twitter in a year, and people are still trying to reach me on it. And they're all desperate because they saw things like Elon Musk giving 2 Nazi salutes at Trump's victory parade. And then the ADL, which is supposed to be, they brand themselves as the most effective and most important anti-hate organization in the country, just keeps giving Elon Musk, now the most powerful anti-Semite, more and more room to encourage hate against Jews.
Yeah, he didn't call it out, did he?
No. The
Germans are like, we know what a Zig Heil is. That was a Zig Heil.
Exactly.
Like, we know this shit.
Exactly. So what I'm encouraging people to do is really work on building your communities. A lot of people are looking to people like me and organizations like mine, Task Force Butler and Veterans Fighting Fascism, and my partner organization, Common Defense. And they're saying, we want to get involved. They're saying, I'm going to go protest in like 10 days. What can you help me with? I am one person, and I have a tiny little organization with just 2 staff and all the volunteers that we can possibly manage right now. Until we are able to hire full-time staff and know that we're paying them in a way that is commensurate with the real world
living wage
that come with this work. We can't accept anyone else's help. So what I'm begging people to do is to start local anti-fascist book clubs. And that might sound boring. It might sound like I'm giving people busy work. But one of the problems of our country, and I imagine you've probably talked about this on your show before, is how we've lost third spaces in the last few decades, certainly since my childhood in the early 90s. The VFW halls, the American Legion halls that veterans and their families used to gather at are starting to no longer exist. The bowling alleys, the ice skating rinks, these are things that people are not doing as much anymore. And especially since COVID, everyone's started to become more remote, and they're looking to people that they see on the internet, me.
Yeah.
And they're demanding stuff of us. I'm just one person. So what I want people to do is become a local leader, because you can't fight a fascist with just an online network. You need to fight fascism in your own backyard.
Exactly.
And you need to do it with people that you can trust your life with.
Exactly. And in real life, like real people, you can shake their hands or give them a hug, look them in the eyes, and have a real relationship. Because frankly, we're in World War III.
Yeah. And, and loneliness is a killer.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of people have been profoundly stressed out seeing what's happening to our country and what's happening more broadly in the world with this shift towards authoritarianism. And the desperation that things like global warming cause can draw people into these right-wing fascist authoritarian things, right? What does a fascist offer? What does an authoritarian offer to their followers? Comfort, a belief that they will be protected, right? At the end of the day, Donald Trump's followers are deeply, deeply insecure, and they trust this carnival barker to protect them. That is what all of the policies are about, is they feel like they're being protected. Now, the way that Donald Trump has weaponized this is he turns it into harming other people, and it causes no actual benefit to his followers, but they've been trained to believe that if someone else is losing, they must be gaining.
Right. So, I'm a mental health professional, and I've been helping people exit radicalized groups for decades and decades. So I'll just add, if I may, Kris, that because I've studied brainwashing for decades, many forms and hypnosis, what happens when you overload the brain with information, with emotionally arousing memes, when people are addicted on their cell phones to their silos, is our rational thinking goes offline, our emotional amygdala gets overstimulated, and we regress to a childhood state, even though we're an adult and we were capable when we were sleeping 7 to 9 hours and not on our phone for 10 hours a day. People who are very educated, intelligent, regress to that childlike state where they want a daddy figure to tell them what to do. Don't worry, I'll keep you safe. Trust me, I know what's best. But it's not rational. And the solution is telling people, listen, you have to step back and understand the model of how brainwashing works. You have to disorient the person's identity, sleep deprive them. There's a whole criteria. I call it the BITE model of behavior, information, thought, and emotional control, where you can start programming in these crazy beliefs and create a pseudo identity as a MAGA person.
I wish that it were safe to encourage people to go to a QAnon event. People who are curious just to see what it looks like, because I have done that, and it is jarring. My experience going to these types of things where, disgraced former General Michael Flynn is one of the chief organizers and one of the, core speakers at these events.
With the Moonies, by the way, the Rod of Iron Freedom Festivals were Michael Flynn and the frickin' Moonies, my former cult.
And the crowd, the response to coded language, to signals, to this loaded, the memes that they respond to, and the religiosity. I was. There is no way to describe the feeling that I have found that I'm able to put into words to describe what it's like to be in the same room with 6,000 people in a 3,000 person auditorium during COVID, with people breaking down and crying because some maniac is on stage speaking in tongues between coming and blurting out sentences saying that they are speaking for God.
Yeah.
That they are a direct conduit from God.
Welcome to my world. I've been dealing with this for decades, my man.
I had seen these things on television. I researched these people, right? I had seen it all online.
Right.
But the camera cannot convey the feeling of being in a room with that many with thousands of people who have given themselves in their entirety, their entire identity, their wealth, their sense of self-worth over to the MAGA cult.
Yeah, and now we know with neuroscience, there is such a thing as brain entrainment through mirror neurons by being in a room with everybody else. there's a contagion effect. Now, people who are trained to stay meta, to know they're infiltrating, they know how to keep their sanity as this is happening, but most people don't have that capacity and they get overwhelmed. And that's why it is dangerous for people to go to cult meetings like that, because they can get mind controlled and hacked. And I actually did a bite model analysis of QAnon years ago. And I have a colleague who's a scholar who has a company that could mine Twitter back to its first tweet to QAnon. And Michael Flynn was there at the very beginning.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
PsyOps, Mr. PsyOps, who was doing it for the U.S. government, started doing it on the American citizens.
So in 2016, shortly after Donald Trump won the election, and Mike Flynn was identified as the national security director, I sent Mike Flynn a friend request. And because we had a bunch of mutuals, he accepted. And I got to watch from inside of his bubble Mike Flynn's radicalization from beyond the election in 2016. And we are still Facebook friends, though he has since over the last couple of years just started to kind of professionalize it into a professional page. It used to just be personal. And I could tell from his activity when something was going on, because he rarely posts. Yeah. But when he did, it would be things like right before his indictment came public or right before his plea deal became public. And watching because his page is public and I think anyone can post on it, watching the reinforcing statements coming from strangers, from his family, from people who were clearly politically connected, elected officials around the country, that no one would recognize, people at the state level. All of these people were just as important to the cult as Mike Flynn. Yeah. It was a reciprocal relationship where he projected out lies and they fed them back to him and he internalized it and believed it.
Yep. And Mike Flynn did a prayer to the I Am Ascended Masters, which goes back to the fascist Ballards. And there's a whole occult, background stuff with QAnon and the protocols of the Elders of Zion and all that whole ideology and stuff. But so and didn't he copyright Digital Soldiers or something? Didn't he take a trademark out or something?
I don't know if he did that, but he and his brother certainly have launched a lot of businesses to I guess as a kind of a shell game to manage these various projects.
Yeah, and Peter Thiel has Palantir, which is a database that law enforcement pays for and uses, but he wants to destroy the United States government.
Yeah.
Why?
Why
would he be entitled to do the database for our intelligence when he wants to destroy us? Like what mastermind made that decision to give him access to it?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of technological intrusions into the United States, since I have really started going viral post inauguration, and I started talking about my own problems with the VA being sabotaged just in this first week of Donald Trump being president, suddenly the appointment system doesn't work for myself and, as far as I can tell, thousands of other veterans. There are people at OPM who've reached out, and I think this has been publicly reported since, saying that, Elon Musk's people just came in and started plugging servers into the OPM. And these are highly sensitive networks, and they're just taking unvetted, commercial focused hardware and plugging it directly into.
I hadn't heard that before. That's terrifying.
Yeah. And in those kinds of intrusions, I suspect with the firings of all the inspectors general and with the nominations of all of these cronies like the Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, and all of the intelligence apparatus, Tulsi Gabbard. None of this stuff is going to be investigated, and anyone who tries is probably going to have the hammer brought down on them.
Yeah. So, but I don't know. So I'm not leaving the country, and I guess I'm a threat because scholars who understand brainwashing and mind control are always a threat to controllers. They don't want the public to know this stuff.
Yeah.
But I also feel like I don't want to self-censor or send a signal, because we need to oppose this as vociferously as we can.
Yeah. And a lot of people have been asking me that question, like, hey, when is that point? When should I know that I need to leave the country? And while I can't answer that question for anyone that I don't know personally, and I do know people who, at this point, it might be a good idea. It might be safe for them to leave the country because they've been targeted by people like Kash Patel and Ivan Raiklin, these maniacs that Donald Trump has empowered. But the average person, I can't answer that question for. And broadly speaking, when I give people a response, I tell them, like, listen, I watched, as a veteran of the global war on terrorism, watch the brain drain and the evacuation of wealth from both Iraq and Afghanistan, and the generations that are going to be set back because those with the intellect, the education, and the wealth to evacuate their country, they did. Right. They never came back. Right. And their country is worse off for it, because the people who were the most important for establishing an effective democracy, they were gone, and they weren't there to do the work. So I encourage people, as bad as it gets, until you are individually targeted and you know that it is you, the individual, who's being targeted, don't even think about leaving.
Yeah, exactly. And organize locally. I just moved to Northampton, Massachusetts, and I was thinking, I'm in a blue state, very blue state. The gay governor, I should be fine. But then I'm starting to hear they're targeting blue states because they already have the red states, so they want to dismantle the blue states. But I'm staying, and I'm going to keep. I'm doing live streams now to augment my podcast, because I want more people who are looking for what do we do to understand there are actual experts who have our own lanes. I don't know what you know. You don't know what I know, but we can talk and share and overlap, but we need to organize through our expertises and do a bottom-up response, and not just look for leadership from the Democrats or from billionaires who, are sitting out or sitting on their hands because they're worried. It's like, and if anyone's listening, Kris needs funding and I need funding, please, because we have a lot of great ideas. A lot of people want to get training. And we need to, accelerate this expertise.
Well, and people need to, fill in the gaps that the billionaires, the progressive, the defenders of democracy, right? Those billionaires who brand themselves as progressive philanthropists, right?
Yep.
Where they have failed is creating a bullpen for the Democrats, for progressives, for people who love and care about democracy, in the way that the Koch brothers and other right-wing billionaires, through creating exclusive clubs that train lawyers to become conservative judges that go on to overturn things like Roe versus Wade, right? The left has failed to do that, and it has failed to do that for for over a generation now.
It's 50 years to be specific. I put
Yeah.
this in the cult of Trump. I said, this has been going on. This has been a long campaign for decades of dismantling existing legislation, co-opting, recruiting, indoctrinating, setting up hundreds of front groups to deceive people so people don't know who's really behind it. Fossil fuel countries and corporations. And I interviewed Kris, a man named Kris Leonard, who wrote a book called Cokeland about the corporate cult of the Kochs. And of course, the father was a John Bircher. So that's a book you should add to your book list for people to read, because they're behind fire and free speech. We want free speech, but don't say anything about global warming. No, that's not okay. We'll talk about everything else, but not what we want to protect.
Yeah. And that's why I'm a broken record when it comes to this book club thing, right? The billionaires are not going to save us. We can't fight oligarchs with oligarchs. It's got to be, the only way to fight oligarchs is with a grassroots movement. And these book clubs give people an opportunity to do things like identify local leaders. And in the formation of these clubs, of these community-based organizations, you are developing leaders. You know, it may sound simple, but someone simply stepping forward and saying, okay, I'm the one who's going to start assigning the venue. I'm going to pick where we go, and everyone's going to follow me, right? That person might be 19 years old today. And in 15 years, they might be a member of Congress, because when they step up with those first, they feel like little steps, but they're not. Those little steps of leadership, they're building relationships. And those are the kinds of relationships that allow someone to run for city council and actually win, or you know, raise money for a higher office. The only way that we can start to fight back against these oligarchs is to focus on our communities and building these in-person relationships. Because if we don't do that now, we are going to continue to fall decades behind the far right and their oligarch-backed recruiting pipeline.
Yep. And I would add that we have a lot of Americans who are 65 and older, who are grandparents, and they should be educating their grandchildren about this stuff and getting them involved. We need to connect them with young people, like people who've experienced World War II, or, you know, vets who've served and experienced this stuff. Need to empower the young generation. That's the hope of the future, are young people. And I'll just say this, I've been thinking about it a lot, but I don't know if you like Marvel characters or if you've watched Star Trek and things like that, but just think about how many stories have been about brainwashing and cults and evil emperors, or, you know, the Sith Lord and whatever, and how now it's our chance in real life to actually join the resistance, the rebellion, and step up against the empire.
Yeah. You know, it's, you know, and back to books, all of these right-wing oligarchs, they keep reading sci-fi fantasy novels and taking away the wrong lessons. Like a big part of the influence of Elon Musk's ideology and his desire to go to Mars comes from books like Starship Troopers,
right?
Which is a book about fascism. It's not a book about space exploration, right? And Palantir came from Lord of the Rings, like it was a source of dark sorcery and evil. It's not something that, you know, had it been named something more overt, maybe the government would think twice about making contracts with a company with that kind of inspiration.
Right.
It's and what it takes is like you said, grandparents, right? Or librarians or teachers. It takes this multi-generational thing. I, as a kid watching Stormship Troopers, the movie, when I was in 6th grade, I think is when it came out, I didn't understand it was a movie about fascism. I just saw them killing bugs and I thought that was cool, right? And it takes an older generation to help people understand the complexity of these novels, of these other pieces of art,
Right.
so that we're not taking the Elon Musk or the Peter Thiel lessons out of books that should be scaring us away from adopting fascist ideology.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll just add another piece of my lane, Kris, since this is the first time we're talking together, is what I've learned over almost 50 years since my deprogramming from the Moonies is the most effective people to help de-radicalize people are family and friends and neighbors who knew the person before they got radicalized, who can connect to their authentic self and remind them of values, like who they were before. Like I was a creative writing major at Queens College. I wrote poetry. I thought, my journey was, creative writing. And then I'm in a fascist cult telling me to throw out my poetry to show my obedience to the Messiah. And I'm throwing out my poetry. But in coming out, people reminding me, you had a talent for words. You should go back to writing. And I had to be encouraged to remember. I had to get those neurons firing again. But most people have told me they've tuned out their relatives and friends who have joined MAGA because they can't take it. It's too upsetting.
Yeah.
But they need to learn how to overcome, right, and regulate themselves, because they can throw lifelines to these people and help them exit.
I am one of those people who has given up on family members who have adopted the MAGA cult or anti-vaccination beliefs, these beliefs that I know to be harmful to society and individuals specifically. And I made a decision after thinking a long time about this, as someone who's immersed in extremism all the time, that I can only make so many sacrifices. I do sacrifice a significant portion of my well-being immersing myself in what most people would call evil all day, every day. So for me, the idea of further taxing myself during a holiday.
I support you 1,000%. Everyone needs to decide for themselves where their attention, where their focus needs to be. But I'm just saying, for the generic public, calling MAGA people maggots or morons and, trying to persuade them with facts is going to make them deeper in and hate you and distrust you. And it's the opposite of what works to get people out. And I have friends who've exited hate groups, and they all talk about loving acts of kindness by Jews, by blacks, by others, that where people were treating them like genuine human beings and not where they're worried they're going to be tattled on by one of their comrades in the cult and turned on, which happens in mind control cults. And people, especially when they have kids, they like, I don't want to raise my kid this way. I don't want my kid to live in a life of hate.
Well, I have a question for you. So one of the things that I have heard from novices, from people who are attempting to do this deprogramming on their own, is that they simply just don't make statements. They just ask questions, and they see if they can, through conversation, through curiosity, help people who have been immersed in the MAGA cult and its information and news silos, how they can help them understand through curiosity the contradictions that they might believe in, without confronting them directly. Is that something you recommend?
That's what I've been teaching for decades. I wrote a book called Freedom of Mind, Empowering Loved Ones to Leave Controlling Cults, groups and beliefs. Respect, curiosity, active listening, taking a position of, I'm willing to change my mind. Let me get to know you. Let me hear your story. Let me step into your shoes. Learning to ask questions, shut your mouth and wait for long silences, because people are terrible at waiting with silences. But the goal is to empower them to think. So they need space and time to think. And then doing a follow-up question and a follow-up question. And what works isn't ever attacking the leader, the doctrine, or the policy head on, but talking about, with MAGA people, Chinese communist brainwashing. And what do? What are the techniques that former military intelligence said they did and do? Or pimps and traffickers. And that appeals to the QAnon crowd that think all the Democrats are traffickers. It's like, let's learn from people who've survived sex trafficking and labor trafficking and learn about pimps and their techniques. So that's what, so we're doing a side door approach because they'll be interested in learning about that. And then it's asking questions about your experience and asking hypothetical questions. And really, people, so the key is not trying to persuade people to leave. The key is empowering them to think for themselves and make their own decisions. And it's getting to that authentic self that was there before the programming happened and reminding people. So I'll ask Kris, what's your first memory of Donald Trump? And they'll be like, oh, I saw him on The Apprentice. What'd you think? Oh, I thought he was a dickhead. I'll go, oh, that's interesting. Do you remember the episode? What was it about what he did that made him a dickhead to you? And then you kind of like, so you're anchoring that memory of their actual response. You know, what'd you think when he cheated on his pregnant wife? What did you think about Stormy Daniels and blah, blah. So but the point is you're helping them to get themselves out. You're not getting them out. It's not a win-lose thing. It's just, I'm a human being. You're an interesting person. You're intelligent. I like to understand your journey.
That makes a lot of sense. And
it works.
As you asked the hypothetical of what's your first memory of Donald Trump?
Yeah, what's your first memory, Kris?
So first, I remember I have always hated reality TV since I was a kid, and it was really invented by MTV and VH1.
Real World and Intervention was the first reality show, though.
Oh, there you go. So,
but maybe it's MTV doing dancing or something.
So for my generation, it was this. It was like the Jersey Shoreization of like catching people in their wildest and most idiotic moments and promoting that. And when I saw The Apprentice, my parents used to watch it nightly on NBC, and I used to walk into their bedroom to say goodnight, and I'd see it on the television and just be like, I can't believe they're doing this to themselves. Like, this is such a waste of brain power. But anyway, the first and only time I've actually met Donald Trump was in the city. I used to work for a photo booth company, and I used to bring photo booths to weddings, bar mitzvahs, that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
And he hosted an event where I brought my photo booth to, and naturally there's models, and I think it was sponsored by Playboy and some liquor company. And he didn't tip. It was my job to drag around an 800-pound steel, full-sized, old-school photo booth, loading it, in and out of a truck, up and down ramps. I'm 155 pounds soaking wet, so that's not an easy job for me. And I remember he didn't tip, and that was he's always been that kind of person. He
stiffs people where they work and they don't get paid even, much less get tips.
And I worked for this company. We were probably the cheapest thing there by a long shot. And his people trying to get it a lower cost and then not tipping like that. I remember that. That's my first impression of Donald Trump, the man.
Yeah. By the way, factoid, did you know Mark Burnett, who did The Apprentice, is the head of media for the Seven Mountain Dominionist cult that's trying to take over our country? So this guy who does Survivor and Shark Tank and other things, he groomed Donald Trump to become this false perception of a great successful business person when he's had failure after failure after failure.
Yeah.
And people like your folks believed the hype.
Yeah. I mean, just tremendous damage to our country in the name of money and so-called entertainment.
And in the belief that God wants them to take over the government and discriminate against gays and women's rights and indigenous rights and all the other facts that we've covered. I really would like you to tell us a story of something you actually, did that you're able to talk about, and to just ignite people's imagination. Because I watched an interview with you, and you had a mask with a skull bottom, and you were like, had the hat on, and it's like they just wanted to see if I was white, and they saw my blue eyes, and I got vetted. Tell us a little bit more about some of the stuff.
So that was the Aryan Freedom Network, the AFN, which is a kind of a modernization of a Texas KKK group that has since spread nationally. The Aryan Freedom Network is an explicitly like swastika burning neo-Nazi organization. And they had been posting online, and this is after Task Force Butler had been around for a while. I had a team. We were watching tons of these groups, and they set out this this advertisement for what they were calling the White Unity Conference. And they were trying to bring together a bunch of hate groups. So I had been in their chat room, through text, getting vetted into the organization because I watched them enough. I can pretend to be one.
The loaded language you were saying. I know the buzzwords.
Exactly.
The whistles.
And I could get myself, invited to this physical location in Texas, but I had to do what they call a skin check, which is very popular with these neo-Nazi organizations for obvious reasons. So I thought that I was preparing for a video interview that would be like this, talking back and forth.
Yeah.
It turned out they turned the camera on and then turned it off, and that was it. They, like you said, saw my blue eyes, and that was it. But I captured that for NBC. There's a documentary team that was tagging along with us for this operation. And we went down to Texas. We rented an RV. This was our most ambitious meeting, and I wish we had the money to do this kind of thing all the time, but we never have. It was a one-time operation. So we landed in Dallas because that's where they had advertised the event, but it was actually in Texarkana, which is all the way, I think, northeast on the border of the state. So we drove the RV, and I had my whole team in it with a spotter car. And we got up there, and I wasn't about to set foot on their property because in Texas, they could murder me and just say he was trespassing, and
right.
that would it. That would be it. It would be done. I would be gone. Right. So I wasn't going to set foot on their property. But what I did was, for those of you who are watching this, I brought my tiny micro drone, and I flew above the White Unity Conference. And I documented what was going on. Now, they had a swastika that they were planning to burn, and they laid it on the ground, hiding behind tarps, but not underneath tarps. So it was easy to spot from the air.
Yep.
And we observed them for a few hours quietly. This thing has a range on it of maybe a couple miles if the air is clear.
So do you put an iPhone on it, or like?
No, it's got a camera, and it broadcasts.
So it's like a Wi-Fi thing, or
similar to that, something? Yeah. And the range on it is tremendous. So we observed for a while, and then we kind of ran out of batteries, ran out of gas because we were hanging out for so long, just loitering and observing from afar. Right. So we went back to refuel, literally refuel and recharge everything, and we came back and So we went from observation to disruption.
Mm.
So the point of the observation was to get the identities of the individuals and of the groups that were joining together. That way we could start to map this network of extremists and extremist organizations. On the second visit to the same event, the same day, that's when we started to impose costs. And we wanted to let these neo-Nazis know that should they choose this way of life, and the purpose of Task Force Butler is we're going to make it a difficult and expensive experience. So we flew our drone not above the trees, but over the clearing where they could see it. And we loitered for a half hour, as long as the battery lasts, put another battery back in and sent it back over, which was a major disruption to them. To further disrupt that, once I was out of Texas, I started tweeting photos and videos of some of the things that we had captured. Not giving away any sensitive information. We don't do that.
Right.
But letting them know that we were there. A few days later, the Aryan Freedom Network filed suit against me, my business, and Task Force Butler. And on, I believe, the second page of the lawsuit was a screen capture of one of the photos that I had posted on Twitter. And it included a picture of the pickup truck that was owned by the lawyer who represented the Aryan Freedom Network in suing me. So
Nice.
I said, well, you want to be a party to the lawsuit? Let's do this. And they backed down. They withdrew the lawsuit. So
yep, that's a great story. You need a drone with a little sound cannon on it. We see you. You can hide, but we're capturing all of your images.
If we get funded to the point where we're able to hire staff and do this type of operation again and buy better equipment. I mean, this is a micro drone. You don't need a license to fly this thing. If we can start investing in that kind of thing, that's not unrealistic. If we could fly commercial drones, we can run interference in a more impactful way. And these fantastical things that I'm talking about, like this is real. You're
right. And then the other side of it there are former members who have exited, who feel repentant, that are willing to tell their story. I was friends with Kerry Noble, who wrote the Tabernacles of Hate. He was number 2 or 3 man, and I think the Covenant Sword and Arm of the Lord. It was the second white supremacy thing. He brought a bomb into a gay church, but had a crisis of conscience and didn't detonate it. Turned himself in and served time. But he was a good guy, a good Christian, and helped me, talk about hate groups and, how they recruit vulnerable people and indoctrinate them.
Yeah. I mean, the few white supremacists who I've dealt with in their capacity as those who would like to impose costs on the people who ruin their lives. One of the neo-Nazi cults that I've spent the most time infiltrating and working against, and we've gotten them sued several times. They just had a $3 million judgment against them 2 weeks ago in Boston, federal lawsuit.
Boston,
major victory for us. So, this particular cult is just that. There are neo-Nazi organizations that are clubs. This one is a cult. Thomas Rousseau, who I believe is somewhere around 23, maybe 24 by now, demands of his followers that they essentially sacrifice every part of their life that is not in service to the club. And when people come out of that and recognize that they had to throw away their friends, their family, they had to pay him money to buy his products in this pyramid scheme to make the gang operate. They had to, put themselves at legal risk, pay for flights to fly across the country to show up at a flash mob march, jumping out of a U-Haul, not knowing where they're going to be, right?
Yeah.
They realized that they made all these sacrifices for a lie. and to in service of one man, that
Sounds like
cult leader.
me when I was 19 to 22.
Yeah, and these folks come to us offering information about the cult and
Yeah.
about its leadership, and we're thankful for that, because that has helped to impose things like this $3 million lawsuit, this
Yeah.
$3 million judgment against
Awesome.
Thomas Rousseau and his members of Patriot Front.
Awesome. And that's another point from in my lane that I want to share with you, Kris, is that there are tens of millions of ex-cult members in America, whether they left the Soviet Union when it was a cult, or China, or some other dictatorship where they were raised in a Christian cult or a Jewish cult or a Muslim cult or whatever, who have left. And
Mm-hmm.
if we could educate them and inspire them to not be ashamed, but share their story, we can educate everyone that the mind is hackable and
Yeah.
it can return to normal. Like it is an error to think that only stupid and educated people can have their minds hacked. It ain't true.
Mm-hmm.
I said
Yeah.
ain't, and I'm a PhD. Isn't that funny?
I mean, I think a lot of people are surprised when they find out that the members of these extremist groups, these swastika flying neo Nazis, are not just country bumpkins living
Right.
in a trailer park, right? That's kind of this stereotype.
Yeah.
Um, it's exclusively angry young white men, and a lot of them grew up with a ton of privilege.
Yeah.
A lot of them grew up in wealthy families. Some of them were very successful in going to school. Paul Gancars, I think is his name, is the Patriot Front regional leader out of Virginia. Until he was found out, he was an engineer. He was
Yep.
making a ton of money.
Yep.
But he was still a full-time neo-Nazi working in service to this cult.
Yeah, and a lot of folks are Aspies, and the Elon Musks, and celebrating that, but they're especially vulnerable to having their mind hacked by the love bombing and the instant community appeal, and the rigid rules and regulations that appeals to their sense of neuroatypicality.
Mm-hmm.
But when they do understand the influence continuum and the bite model and the malignant narcissist, the cult leader playbook profile, they don't forget it. They remember it.
Yeah.
They become a force for freedom.
Oh yeah, and these neo-Nazi organizations have especially focused their predation on people who have various levels of or types of autism.
Yeah.
They have the entire alt-right community has broadly adopted the diagnosis that's no longer on the books, Asperger's.
Yeah.
And it has become this kind of this signal. And it's something that people as powerful as Elon Musk engage in online and promote.
Yeah, exactly. I actually interviewed the world authority on Asperger's. He's an Australian psychologist named Tony Atwood. And I asked him about Elon Musk and such. But I guess I want to just say categorically that I really believe most people are good.
Yeah.
Most people are not pedophiles or predators. Most people were sexually abused as children don't go on to become predators. It's a small number, but it's those small percentage of criminals, career criminals, that are making a mess for everybody else. And we have to understand we have more of us, and we have a lot of smarts and a lot of resources if we just understand the correct diagnosis and have a plan that we can implement over time, step by step.
And that is, the cultural diagnosis of fascism, of the rise of fascism, written by Hannah Arendt in her book, which is escaping me, The Origins of Totalitarianism.
Yeah.
She writes about the banality of evil, how it is just everyday human beings, your neighbors, your family, who allow fascism and National Socialism, totalitarianism to rise to power. And that's a lesson that she learned from watching the trials of Nazis.
Except Hannah Arendt got it wrong. I interviewed an Israeli documentarian, and Eichmann was an anti-Semite through and through. There were recordings of his actual beliefs, and he conned everybody to think he was just following orders, but he was a true believer. So she actually got that wrong about saying he was just, following orders. No.
I guess I misunderstood the reading. I thought that she was speaking broadly about the Germans.
No, so 10% of the German people were Nazis. Only 10%. And the Trumpers know they don't need to recruit and indoctrinate everyone, but they need to carry a loud noise, using fear and terror tactics. But the key is using our frontal cortex to go, it's a tactic. They're doing this intentionally. I'm not going to allow myself to get, hopeless and aroused and check out. I'm going to do what's within my power to do day by day so that I can go to sleep at night feeling like I'm part of a solution and not just caving to evil.
Yeah. And that's, going back to the same thing of just building communities to build resilience, to build a support network. It is the way that people fall into these fascist cults is they are first separated from their other support networks.
Yeah, isolated. Yep. It makes it easier to control people. Keep them up all night, too. Sleep deprivation works. So, Kris Butler, I am such a fan. Task Force Butler, Veterans Fighting Fascism. Tell us the name of your Substack.
Again. Yeah, on offense with Kris Goldsmith. I'm easy to find anywhere online because I'm Kris with a K, Kris.
Right, and we're going to do a blog from a transcription of this. We'll add links to everything, and I'm on Substack too. I'm already following you, but I hope we're going to do more together. I just think you're awesome. Keep up the great work. If you know any folks in Northampton, Mass, that you trust, please introduce them to me. I want trustworthy folks in my community.
My wife grew up in Massachusetts, so I'll ask her.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Steve Hassan here. It's been decades since my family rescued me from the Moonies. I've been at this for over 47 years. The need has never been greater. If you're able, please consider hitting the super thanks button below, and it'll help us to do better. Every penny will help us toward our goal of educating the planet about undue influence. Remember, it's your mind, only you should control it.